We're on? Okay, we are back. Apologize for those who were waiting. We had a little bit of a technical glitch, which hopefully is now resolved. Mr. Asarte, welcome to Committee of the Whole.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today's presentation, this is an overview of some of the contemplated changes for the Municipal Development Plan and Land Use Bylaw, following completion of Cougar Creek long-term mitigation and some hazard and risk assessments that have been done. The presentation is going to be a brief background on the policy history around steep creeks and floods in general, and then speak to the contemplated changes and then review implications for 2 town-owned parcels on Grotto Way. Prior to the flood in 2013, flood policy in Canmore consisted of provincial mapping, was based on provincial mapping, primarily focused on flooding in the valley bottom. This was a hazard-based 1 in 100 year flood approach, not dissimilar from what we have today with their current updates. And this assessment did not consider steep creek hazards. We didn't have that nomenclature at the time. And that can be visualized by the mapping of the time, which showed Cougar Creek flood hazard as being a thin ribbon that stayed primarily within the channel. In 2013, we had the largest rain event recorded in the area. This brought with it recognition of the steep creek hazards in the community. These are processes that were quite different than typical river flooding, and the impacts were far exceeding any of our previous studies. We had studied not just Cougar Creek, but a number of the other creeks, Three Sisters Creek, Stoneworks Creek. And what we saw was significantly in excess of that. And so after the floods, we initiated the Mountain Creek Hazard Mitigation Program. That program included assessments of all of our creeks, steep creeks in Canmore. And Cougar Creek is shown here, and it includes high extreme hazards, which are deep and fast-moving water and debris, shown in red. Moderate hazards shown in orange, low hazards, shallower, slower-moving water shown in yellow. It was clear at that time that the risks due to steep creeks or what became clear is that the risks that are generated by steep creeks are largest in rare events. And it can be this exponential case where not much happens in, say, even up to 1 in 100 year event, but all of your risk lies in the events that happen beyond that, 1 in 200, 1 in 500 year. And that's certainly the case with Cougar Creek. And so what was brought forward at the time by our expert advisors was to use a risk-based approach. And this is an approach used more and more these days and allows us to give consideration to those rarer events. The risk-based approach was captured in policy. The aims were to consider loss of life of an individual within a particular property, individual risk, give consideration for risk of multiple fatalities in a single event within the community, termed group risk, and to give consideration for impacts on infrastructure, critical facilities, and general economic risk. Thresholds for these risk tolerances were established in the MDP. Safety risk for new development was established at 1 in 100,000 for individuals. And that's approximately your risk as an individual of dying in a fire of any type in Canada in any given year. The risk threshold for existing development was set at 1 in 10,000, and this is approximately a risk of a fatality due to an automobile collision in Canada in any given year. The difference in the thresholds reflects that it's very, very difficult to mitigate for risk once a development's built. It's much easier at the time of proposed development to use an appropriate risk threshold like 1 in 100,000. So that gave us a reasonable target to bring risk down across the community. The LUB included, and economic risk was more of a subjective approach. There wasn't specific thresholds established, but it's considered in all of our risk assessments. The economic risk is part of the business case for the extent of mitigation. So we want to reduce the risk for loss of life, but on a creek like Stoneworks Creek, for example, where there isn't a lot of life loss risk, there's very significant economic risk. So that helps inform the business case for why you would mitigate. The LUB included steep creek overlays that ensured that the risk thresholds of the MDP would be respected for development. There was recognition in the LUB that use should be heavily restricted in high and extreme hazard zones. That risk would require additional study in moderate hazard zones, and that would be to ensure those risk thresholds were met. And that in low hazard zones, provided that you met some minimum requirements for protecting that development, that you would generally be respecting those risk thresholds. So that was established in the mapping. And further, we included study areas in the LUB, and that indicated areas where hazard assessments hadn't yet been completed, but would have to be completed to allow for the underlying uses in most cases. We came up with a development hold zone. There was a lot of uncertainty, particularly with Cougar Creek. Cougar Creek is the one creek where our group risk exceeds acceptable thresholds. And so the development hold zone was introduced in both the MDP and LUB as a way to restrict uses in the entirety of the Cougar Creek area, recognizing that in that area the group risk was just not in an acceptable range. So now I'll get into some of the changes that are being proposed. The first is an update to the group risk figure. And I apologize in advance and invite questions as we go or at the end. There's a lot of jargon, a lot of statistical numbers in these risk metrics. And so if you have any questions, please let me know.
And if you could help me out with the X and Y's on those, the font is way too small for me to.
I can't.
You can't either.
That's part of the update, is that particularly in the existing figure, it's very difficult to see.
Okay.
Being
That's a
bit
great
facetious, but it's part of the issue with it. It's hard to interpret. So the idea, if we look at the graph on the right, and I don't know if I can, oh yeah, I can zoom in. Yeah, first of all, it's logarithmic, and the intent with that is to try to get a straight line on the graph, but your tolerance for multiple fatalities exponentially decreases. So people die in car accidents every single day in Canada, and they make local news. When a bus is involved in a collision like we saw recently, that's national news and for multiple years. We just have a very low societal tolerance for multiple fatalities in a single event. Bottom axis is number of fatalities. The axis on the right is the cumulative probability of that number of fatalities occurring in a 100-year period. What's important to know here is that you can graph, and for Cougar Creek, for example, it's a 1 in 3,000 risk of 80 fatalities occurring in a single event. Where that lands on this graph, if we were to take the 80 fatalities and graph it up. Okay, my marker's not working. If you use the bottom axis and graph up from 80, it would land somewhere well above the reference line. So that risk would be considered unacceptable. And there's fewer fatalities in more frequent events, and that cumulative risk plots as a line on the graph and shown in the risk assessment. I was probably right in my first assessment that I couldn't explain it. Okay, so the change we're looking to propose here is that we'd like to remove the as low as reasonably practical. And so the idea would be your risk profile for the creek will sit outside of the acceptable zone. It'll be in the unacceptable. You try to bring it into the acceptable zone, but often that means it's incredibly expensive. And so you bring it into the orange zone, which is the as low as reasonably practical. That was the standard that was used when we established the MDP. We've moved now, practitioners have moved towards using this alternative approach. The reference line is the same, so the risk threshold is the same. And the intent here is that you bring it below that reference line, your risk. And then within that reference line, you consider the cost benefit of moving along that spectrum. So if risk reduction can be done reasonably and cheaply beyond that, then you may make the decision to do that. It's really just provides more flexibility, but essentially it's establishing that if you can bring risk within that reference line, it's considered acceptable. The hold zone that I explained earlier wasn't ultimately applied. We used instead this hazard overlay within the land use bylaw, and we were able to successfully manage risk in Cougar Creek in general over the last decade by applying that approach. Restricting Airbnbs to outside of the flood window. No new development occurred where it introduced new individuals living in homes in high or extreme risk areas. And so that hold zone was intended for a specific purpose. We're recommending as part of our updates that we remove it. There is no other area in town that would apply. And with mitigation now in place, that provides an opportunity to get rid of that. These are the areas, the study areas are shown in the shading that have been studied as part of the Smith Creek and Resort Center area plans. And so we are working presently on converting those studies into hazard overlay maps that will be used to inform development out in those areas. Lastly, we're contemplating a new residual hazard zone in the LUB. This hazard zone is intended to reflect the pre-mitigated hazard in areas where we know that an event can occur that exceeds the capacity of the existing mitigation. It is to address the potential failure of man-made mitigation. We see that happening often with dikes and other structures. And it's to consider our limitations of our understanding of hazards in the first place. I think we've done a very good job characterizing the hazard, but science develops over time. We thought we had a good handle on things in the past, and we have a changing climate. So we don't want to forget the fact that this is a hazard zone or could in fact be impacted. And so maintaining an overlay that does two things we feel is important. It will limit the intensification on those lands, so we're maintaining the present use without intensification. And it's going to require some minimal level of structural consideration during construction. For example, on sloped alluvial fans in general, we want to have openings on the downslope side so that you can't fill your structure from openings on the upslope. There's a minimum amount of reinforcing put in the foundations to protect against erosion, for example. These costs are relatively minimal, but putting thought into the development at the time of construction can save from having material impacts from an overland flood in the future. So we find that to be a reasonable balance between accepting that there's mitigation and we can revise the hazard zones significantly do that mitigation, but we're not completely ignoring the fact that that mitigation may have limitations in the future. These proposed changes in aggregate have implications for the 2 town-owned parcels along Cougar Creek. These were purchased after the 2013 floods due to this being clearly a high-risk area. The homes were considered total losses. So the MGA has provisions that allows you to rebuild your home after a disaster if it's only damaged to a certain extent. I think it's 50% or 60% or something like that. These homes were damaged beyond that, and at the time we weren't prepared to allow development to occur in an area that had just been impacted with so much uncertainty around the future. And so in response to that, council approved purchase of the 2 lots. The contemplated changes will allow development on the parcels with mitigation in place and changes to the hazard mapping. Based on the underlying land use of R1A residential detached small lot district. Based on that zoning, administration recommends disposing of the land at market rates, and that this could be used to replenish reserves depleted to construct the project or other council priorities. And a separate report would be brought forward concurrent with the MDP and land use updates with recommendations for that disposal. Next steps in the process are to come back to council in February to have first reading to changes to the LUB and MDP, and in the spring of 2025 have a public hearing with 2nd and 3rd readings. From there we can publish updates to the bylaw and development can resume in a modified way in Cougar Creek and out on the TSMV lands. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Asarte. I'm very happy to see the revised maps. I remember seeing, in fact, the map that we currently have wasn't the first map that was ever produced. I remember the first map was all red. The whole of the northeast of the highway, all red, you know, and so it was. This is quite the improvement. Yeah. Councillor Faubert, question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Asarte. I have a question about this map. The residual zone seems to end at our municipal border, but does the hazard end at our municipal border?
The residual zone is a policy boundary, and so the policy boundary would end at the border. The revised hazard map accounts for the mitigation being in place and doesn't show hazard beyond what's reflected in this map in the solid colored areas.
Okay.
And so at this time, we don't have a map that would reflect a hazard going beyond the municipal boundaries.
Is there a process where we work with our neighboring municipalities on development plans that would reflect a change like this to our MDP and land use bylaw in areas that are adjacent to our borders?
In cases where there were material impacts, for example, on Pigeon Creek, we would, yes.
Yeah. This is not a material? We wouldn't?
Technically, from a hazard mapping perspective, there would be no hazard shown within the MD. And so there's the original hazard map pre-mitigation and then the post-mitigation hazard map, which is the solid colors. And so we can certainly inform them that the changes are taking place and okay, they can understand them, but there would be no material impact to the MD based on our studies.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Looking to see if there are any other questions. Councillor Faubert?
I thought I have thought others would have more questions. I just had one more. Can you maybe help me understand why the residual hazard would prevent increased density?
Great question. And I say that because it is something that we've internally had a lot of discussion around. There isn't a clear black and white answer to say, if you have a hazard map that's showing if the policy says study to 1 in 100 year and you have a floodway that's defined, it's easy to develop policy around that with those parameters. In this case, we're really trying to recognize that we wouldn't develop in an area like this at all in the absence, had the full extent of the hazard been understood in advance, we would develop this area in a very, very different way. We've created significant mitigation to allow us to bring that risk down into as low as reasonably possible zone, but that comes with some residual risk that I touched on earlier. And so it's trying to balance the idea that we can continue to develop in this area, but we don't want to remove all restriction and allow for significant intensification when we have this major hazard and this concern around residual risk. And so this is our attempt to balance that. We allow for development at the underlying current land use, and we avoid introducing intensification that could turn that material, that underlying risk, into something more material kind of silently. But it's not a clear-cut decision, and really this is just going based on our experience with risk management over time here, and the fact that we've been surprised once as a community, and we want to be resilient and better prepared.
Well, and it strikes me there was another slide that kind of had ratios around new development and existing development, and those were different. And so it sounds like to me like intensifying density intensifies the risk. So more density changes the risk calculation. Right now, what we're saying, this risk we're okay with, but we add more homes, we add more people, we add more infrastructure and economic value. That's a different risk calculation for us to consider.
It is, and it isn't to say that risk couldn't be mitigated. For example, you could do a multi-story building and put in robust foundations, and that could be quite safe development in there. It's that the hazard mapping post-mitigation looks like everything's okay. So there would be nothing to what level would you mitigate that building? And so it probably wouldn't happen. What would happen is that buildings would get developed, they wouldn't be done robustly, and if there were to be an event that exceeded the capacity of the mitigation, we'd have a lot more vulnerable development out in the community. And so this is a way of preserving the memory of the fact that there is a residual risk and balancing what would be probably unfettered intensification with allowing for densification to the underlying land use, which is fairly significant. It could allow for secondary suites and those sorts of things to be developed over time, but done in a way with some built-in resiliency as a baseline requirement.
So what's their zone now, including ADUs, is okay, but if people were applying to, say, direct control zone or seek some sort of intensification, when these MDP and land use bylaw changes are made, that would be a reason why those types of applications wouldn't be successful.
The overlay would be there to highlight that there was a residual risk that was considered important enough that it warned against that intensification in the future.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Sarté.
looking to see if there are any other questions. Okay, seeing none, so I guess we will see this again in February,
Correct.
coming to council. Great. All right, we will now, thank you very much, Mr. Sarte.
Thank you.
We'll now move to item D3, affordability measures and services. Ms. West, welcome to Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor Councillor and councillors. Thanks for this opportunity to present. I'll be sharing today on the measures of affordability that we use and highlighting some of the services in our community which improve affordability for our residents. One of the goals in Council's strategic plan is livability, and one of the key objectives towards that goal is that municipal initiatives and services are designed to increase affordability. Previously, we used the living wage as a measure of affordability, but we're now exploring other metrics to provide a comprehensive view of affordability in our community. This presentation will review various measures and services aimed at improving affordability in our community, highlighting our commitment to making Canmore a place where all residents can thrive. And please note that I'll be back before Council in February for a review of the annual report to the community, which also references our objectives and key results in Council's strategic plan. There have been benefits and challenges with using the living wage. It gave us a comprehensive and single measure to consider affordability within our community. However, there were concerns regarding changes in the methodology. We're stepping away from the network and the use of the measure. We will see that change in the Community Monitoring Report, which is available on the town website and in references within administrative documents. We will still be measuring affordability. And one of the ways that we'll do that is with the cost of living index. This is displayed on the Canmore Community Monitoring Report, and it's sourced from the Government of Alberta's Spatial Price Index Survey. The cost of living index helps us understand the price differences between Canmore and other communities in Alberta, using Edmonton as a base or reference community. In 2018, which is the most recent year that we have available for this, but hopefully within the next year we will have updated data. In 2018, the overall living costs in Canmore were 42.9% higher than in Edmonton. This means that for every $100 spent in Edmonton on living costs would require an additional $42.90 in Canmore for the same items. And when we break that down and look at individual items, for example, food, $100 spent on food in Edmonton would require $111 in Canmore. And the most significant discrepancy is in shelter costs. This is where $100 in Edmonton would equate to $241 in Canmore, which really underscores the critical need for non-market housing solutions in our community. We also track and report a few different measures regarding income. We track individual median income, family median income, the number of households in different income brackets, and we also track inflation year over year and compare that to the annual median family income. Based on 2022 tax data, which is the most recent available, median family income increased by 5% from 2021 to $130,000 a year. And another measure that we track is the Gini Index of Income Distribution. This measures the distribution of income over a population, and it's on a score of 0 to 100. A higher number indicates greater inequality, with high-income individuals receiving much larger percentages of the total income of the population. Based on 2021 census data, Canmore's Gini Index moved slightly lower than the previous census in 2016, from 45 down to 41. But for comparison, we've got a chart up here for you to show that Banff's Gini Index is 31, Calgary is 38, Vancouver 38, and Toronto at 40, while Canmore is at 41. We know that housing is the most significant expense impacting livability in Canmore. We saw this in the living wage, and we continue to see this with the other measures that we use. We measure multiple indicators regards to housing, and one of these is the housing price ratio. In 2023, we saw a 6.5% increase in median home sale prices from 2022, reflecting the ongoing demand and challenges in our housing market. The housing price to income ratio for all family types and home types was 7.3 in 2019. This means that the median house was 7.3 times higher than the median employment income in Canmore. When we look at 2021, total income compared to house price ratio was 8 in Canmore. In Banff, it was 8.2, while Cochrane was at 4. And for reference, the target is 3 or less. If we look at Alberta in general, for this year, the average was 5.6 for that ratio. We also show housing prices in the Canmore Community Monitor Report. We show the median price of home purchases based on recent sales using data specifically from real estate agents here in town. We also break that down into the average price by home type, so single-family homes and detached dwellings versus multifamily units. And we also pulled some data specific for this report to show the median home prices for Canmore compared to other communities. And you can see that the prices here in Canmore much more closely resemble other resort communities like Squamish and Whistler, rather than our closest neighbors like Cochrane and Calgary. We can also look at Toronto and Vancouver, and we see the median family home price for Toronto was 1.5 million and Vancouver was 2 million. We also use Canmore Community Housing's Vital Homes program and report on that. They have both a rental and a home ownership program, which provide housing opportunities below market rates. We track and report on the number of units in that Vital Homes program and the percentage of new homes in Canmore that are Vital Homes. Vital Homes are crucial at retaining non-market housing in perpetuity, providing essential housing options for residents. The number of units available in this program continues to increase each year. Currently, we have 280 units, 173 being ownership units and 110 being rentals. By the summer of 2025, 18 more units are expected to be added with the Stewart Creek development, and more units are included in the Palliser Area Use Plan. In the Community Monitor Report, we also display the average advertised rental rates, as well as the average number of rental vacancies advertised each month, and the income required to afford a one-bedroom unit based on 30% of an income. This data is sourced from Canmore Community Housing's compilation of advertised rental listings. The prices continue to trend upwards, with the average advertised price for a one-bedroom rental in 2023 being $2,464 a month. The number of vacancies continues to trend down since the year 2018. This highlights the pressing need for more rental options. Despite these challenges, 93% of survey respondents in Canmore's Citizen Perspective Survey rated the quality of life in Canmore as good or very good. And we do display those survey results in the Community Monitor Report as well. We want to focus not only on the measures of affordability, but also shine a light on the services and initiatives that reduce the cost of living for residents. In addition to the Vital Homes program, Canmore provides free local transit, and this saw a 14% increase in daily rides over last year, highlighting its growing importance. The Family Connection Center's no-cost programs had a 21% increase in attendance this year over last year, emphasizing the value and necessity of these services for our community. And our Affordable Services program now has 24 different community partners, and this program supports over 580 households, showcasing the collaborative effort in our community to enhance affordability. There are many more programs and services available within our community. I won't spend time today discussing all of them, but I really would like to highlight one last one, and that's the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program. This is instrumental not only in helping residents get their taxes filed and thereby getting money back in their pockets if they have a rebate coming to them, but it also has a secondary benefit of opening the door for many other supports, If someone wants to apply for programs like Affordable Services or the Vital Homes Program, they need to prove their income and have their taxes filed from the last year to show that. And getting this done for folks in our community means that they are now eligible to apply for these programs, as well as other government subsidies that are eligible for. This year, the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program helped file over 270 tax returns, and this resulted in over $1.8 million in benefits for our residents. That concludes my presentation for today. Thanks for your attention, and I'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. West, for this very informative report, and what I really appreciate is bringing all of these things together so that we can see it, because it's important that we see the breadth and depth of the programming that we do provide and support. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. West. Can you go back to the slide of the Gini index for me? Oh, you passed it. That one right there. So, is this saying that Banff is cheaper than Calgary?
Not cheaper exactly, but yeah. If we were at 0, there would technically be perfect equality. Every single person in the community makes the same amount or has the same income.
Right.
100 would be perfect inequality. So we are hoping for a lower number. Perfect inequality would mean that one person gets all of the income and the others get none. So
Right.
generally, we're aiming for a lower number, but it doesn't necessarily show affordability of that community, just the disparity of the income among residents.
Among residents. That's a great, thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. And so to confirm that, I just want to make sure this is where the need to reside comes into play, because it is choosing who lives within the town site of Banff through that policy, and you have to work in Banff. So there's less of higher income jobs, whereas in Canmore, we know that there's a higher number of investment income, like for every dollar that is earned. I think Sean and I, what was that, a bunch of years ago, the number was like 19 cents on every dollar earned came from investment income in Canmore, whereas the national average is somewhere around 5 or 6 cents per dollar.
Yep, the need to reside could certainly have an impact in the difference
Totally.
between Canmore and
Yeah.
Banff.
Thank you.
Yeah. Might I ask a favor of a member of administration to go remind the folks outside that we're having a meeting going here? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Graham.
And just one more. The average one-bedroom rate was $2,400?
Yeah, that is the advertised rate. So Canmore Community Housing gathers listings that people have advertised. So they're only going to be ones that have been seen in Kijiji or Rent Faster or wherever they might be advertised. That's the asking price. That's not necessarily the same price that everyone in the community who's in a one-bedroom would be currently paying. We know that when a vacancy happens and the unit turns over, there tends to be an increase in the price every time.
Very anecdotally, I would have thought the number was more like $1,500 for a bedroom. Just
If
for
we were
a
to
single-
look at Canadian Mortgage and Housing Company numbers, they might be closer to that, but they're not measuring advertised rates.
So there's a difference. I think you're talking about
A bedroom versus a one-bedroom.
I think this is a one-bedroom unit.
Yeah. And that doesn't include any sort of like nightly rental type places. This is long-term resident.
These are long-term, not short-term, yes.
It's a huge number.
Councillor Hillstead.
The most up-to-date, just going off of the CCH website, is actually closer to 2,000 now, so it has dropped a little tiny bit. Or that was in October, so that was 2 months ago, but so it did come down a little bit. So the Q3 average was 2,100 for a one-bedroom. So, but again, it's fluctuating, and
Councillor Faubert.
From your experience working with the affordable services that we provide, what's the program that is the most successful, and what are any gaps that you think we might be needing to look at in the future?
Gaps in general for affordability in Canmore? I mean, we all know that housing, I think that's pretty evident, is one of the biggest factors, is the biggest factor. We saw that with the living wage, we see that here. We have plans, we have great plans in motion for increasing rental units. They're still going to be expensive, and there's still a long wait list. I'm not sure what the wait list is currently for Canmore Community Housing's program, but that need continues. I do believe the Affordable Services Program is a great program, and I love to see that we recently changed that to a two-tier system to include more people. Getting more businesses on board with that continues to happen as well. And like I mentioned, the volunteer income tax program, that has a huge impact. I think housing is still the biggest thing that we want to continue working on.
Yeah, thank you.
Looking to see if there are any other questions. No? Thank you very much for your presentation, and wishing you the very best for the holidays.
Thank you.
All right, so now we will move to councillor updates. And I'm just going to open it up. Are there any questions with regards to any of the updates provided? Councillor Ma?
Just a question for you, Mayor Crosser. With regards to human-wildlife coexistence roundtable, it said off-leash dogs increasing on trails, so that's disappointing, and a third of users and 3/4 of mountain bikers are with a, is that
Yeah.
like 3/4 of mountain bikers are with an off-leash dog?
That's what the update provided, yep.
Oh, okay, great, just double checking, thank you.
Councillor Graham?
And I'll just follow up with that one with a question for administration. And yet, off-leash dog tickets have been declining year over year?
Mr. Mackay?
I don't have that stat in front of me, but we could certainly pull it.
Dr.
So
Collins?
we can't always, municipal enforcement officers can't always ticket in provincial spaces,
I understand.
nor can we be everywhere all at once. So there are things that the province is able to pick up on a camera. We don't have officers standing by in the same way that a camera is. So
I
those
should-
two things seem correlated, but they may not necessarily be. It depends, the officer has to be in the right place at the right time in order to catch someone, and it's really hard to do.
It was a officer from Alberta Parks that provided the information.
And we cannot ticket in Alberta
That's,
Parks.
so it
Yeah, I
wasn't, it
understand
wasn't
this.
about within the town
So the-
municipality.
Could I infer in that the problem is moving outside of town?
I don't know what you can infer, I can just say that that's what the observation was of the update provided.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Thanks, Mayor Krauser. I think it's really hard to know, especially as there's increased tourism. In other communities, dogs off-leash, it's very different depending on, right? So I think inferring things is fairly dangerous. It really depends on who the people are and where they're from and what they're used to. And so I think it's really hard to pinpoint and understand what's going on there. Yeah.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question for Councillor Faubert about on-up ridership numbers being lower in 2024. And I was wondering if that had a lot to do with the fact that there are new transportation players in the market. So I just noticed that now Red Arrow is coming into Banff and Canmore from Calgary. And then there's the Flixbus, and there's Rider Express, and a few others. And I was just curious if Martin had any commentary as to the reason.
I think definitely the Flixbus. The Red Arrow's new, but the fact that we're seeing private operators come into this space as well is encouraging.
Yeah.
Shows that there's a market of transporting people from the city to the Bow Valley. What does it mean for our audit service? I don't know if we're there yet as a commission. But I know that this is an area where we're keeping our eyes on it, because if the private sector is gonna provide
Yeah.
this service, like.
Affordably. It's $10 on the, Red Arrow, yeah.
I used to remember when you could take the Greyhound bus anywhere. Oh, no,
Yeah, yeah, me too.
apparently. But yeah, the Red Arrow more recently, really significant. But yeah, definitely the numbers were different this
Yeah,
summer for
that's good
Onnit.
news. I think it's good news. It actually
Yeah.
takes pressure off of Rome and Onnit because it has its own challenges as well.
Yes.
But as long as it's affordable and connective, thank you.
Any other questions with regards to the council updates? Okay, we'll move to the administrative updates, section F. And I am just going to open it up wide open. If you have a question, hit your button. Councillor Graham.
One question's for corporate services and communications. We did a virtual town hall and had 100 people on that. I understand it was limited to 100 people. And I wonder if what we're doing to address that limit.
We'll get a different license that allows greater attendance. We had never had anything close to that and didn't realize we had a limit of 100. So we did right away publish the link to the recording of that town hall and advertise that that was available. But it won't happen again because we'll have a bigger license.
Like an unlimited license or 1,000?
Typically they go, I know the next one goes up to 500.
Yeah.
And I think it costs like $100 or something like that. And then if you want up to 1,000, it's that much more.
Well, I'm really glad that people are tuning in.
Mr. Stiver?
Not sure if it helps or not, but the views on that Mayor's Town Hall is currently at 223 on YouTube. So,
Okay, great, thank you.
Teams is another option where there's no limit, so we'll find a way.
Okay. Councillor McCallum?
Sorry, with Google Meet, I don't think there's a limit on
We
that
don't
either.
use Google Meet, yeah.
All goes to about the recording capacities too.
Yeah.
Because in order to use it afterwards, like, we'd have to investigate that. Okay. Councillor Ma, you have a question about the administrative updates?
Yeah, question for municipal infrastructure, planning and development. Section 1B, it says removal of tourist home as a listed use, and we have the Gateway District and Gateway District 2, and then the second part of that part of the report says the second phase includes amendments to stat plans and land use districts, the government development within, and it says TSMV as well. So I was under the impression there weren't any changes that could be applied to the Three Sisters ASPs, and this sounds like the tourist home piece is somehow being incorporated.
Yeah, so that's just acknowledging that with both Stone Creek, Spring Creek, and Three Sisters Mountain Village Properties Limited, their tourist homes were included in kind of comprehensive area plans led by the developer. So we want to loop back to those developers just to work with them through the how best to implement and where we can implement that phasing out of tourist homes.
Okay.
The area redevelopment plans included tourist homes, and they're subject to a court order, and so we actually can't deny that usage.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we can have a conversation with them about is there potential there to look at removing some of it?
Right.
Okay, so it's in a conversation piece. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, any other questions on the administrative updates? Going. Okay. Anything that anyone has with regards to the council resolution action list or the correspondence? Does that trigger any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will move that we adjourn. All those in favor? Carried unanimously.